All right, welcome everyone to the third instalment of our ICMJ webinars. We're really lucky today to have a good lineup of speakers. We have James Taylor, who's the LAMBPLAN Development Officer for Sheep Genetics, joining us. And we also have Steve and Debbie Milne, who are White Suffolk breeders from Waratah White Suffolks down in Victoria. They've joined us today. And we're going to tackle the topic of breeding lambs today for consumers of tomorrow. So I'd like to welcome our speakers and hand over to James Taylor.
Thanks, Claire. Just while I'm sharing my screen, so my role is to support terminal and maternal producers with the services that we offer at LAMBPLAN. And so today, a lot of my work is focused on eating quality, and so today I'm producing lambs of today for the consumer of tomorrow. Has that come through? All good. Here we go. So our challenge that we face as an industry, and it's been an ongoing challenge, is how do we keep lamb on the menu and the table? We need to provide a quality product that exceeds consumer expectations every time, because they are paying more and more. So let me start by telling you what consumers are telling us and some of the decision making that informs what we do in our genetics programs. So the first point is the importance of eating quality at the farm gate. And secondly, I'll give you some insight into some industry trends and data. So if you look at growing global demand, it's increased 50% in the last 25 years. And 20 out of 25 of those years, we've broken records for the demand for sheep meat. So really winning in terms of a couple of factors. They are population growth and wealth growth in certain populations, and people appreciating the quality and the attributes of lamb. But there are a couple of headwinds that the lamb industry faces, and we're trying to address those through eating quality. So some of those are price, especially people need to receive a product that is worth paying for. Some alternative proteins such as chicken, pork are often cheaper alternatives. And there's also some personal concerns such as sustainability, nutrition, or welfare views that we need to be mindful of so that we can keep selling lambs in the future. So the importance of lamb eating quality at the farm gate was really, we had a shocking realisation in the 90s. In 1997, there was a survey of retail lamb, and it revealed that 20% of loins failed to meet consumer expectations. And that's quite a scary revelation, because loins are quite a favourable cut in the carcass. So it sort of indicated that there are other cuts that are going to be really impacted by declining eating quality. So it was crucial to respond to that and what consumers were saying about the lamb that they were eating. Furthermore to that, we also did some willingness to pay studies through MLA, and what it shows is the importance of eating quality and the relationship to how much people will pay for good meat. So if we set a benchmark for average quality product at 3-star, and that's 100% of the price that someone's willing to pay, it doesn't matter what country you're in. If we step up to a better than everyday quality, so a 4-star product, consistently they'll pay 50% more. And if we step up higher to that premium product, they'll pay twice as much for that. It also revealed that they will pay for product that fails to meet consumer expectations, but only half as much. So this is pretty important data, and we actually use that to put an economic value on eating quality in our indexes, for example. So what do consumers tell us about lamb? How do they eat it and what do they think of it? Well, quite often it's a big winner in the special occasions. So think about a barbecue, Sunday roast, having people over. Lamb's often championed at those sort of things. It's also got a pretty strong presence in food service. So you quite often see it on the menu. And one of the key things that keeps people coming back is flavour. So that's what they really love about lamb. So our opportunity really is to increase the purchasing and consumption frequency of lamb. We have to be mindful at the same time that the price of lamb has gone up over the period since 2000. So what we've done here is we've indexed it against chicken. So you can see the price of chicken has stayed pretty much around 500 cents a kilo. However, the price of red meats, especially lamb, has risen to 3 times that of chicken today. So people love lamb. It's a special occasion meat, but it needs to be worth what they're paying for it. Looking at what has been done on farm in terms of our genetic progress, I guess a lot of the early progress was about meeting consumer needs, and the initial needs were for better lean meat yield. So people were sick of buying lamb that was all fat and bone. They wanted to actually buy meat. So we had the Trim Lamb campaign, and LAMBPLAN was born during that period in the late 80s. And some of the key traits we made awesome genetic gain in are post-weaning eye muscle depth and post-weaning weight, so growth and muscle, as well as getting trimmer. So you can see here's our genetic trends for terminal sheep over that time, and they've gone up really well. So the terminal lamb industry did a really good job at improving that. And you can see here that lean meat yield has increased over that time as well. However, concurrently, because of the genetic correlation between that lean meat yield and some of the eating quality factors, what's happened is intramuscular fat, which is this green one, has declined genetically over time. And we can see that shear force, which is your toughness of meat, has gone up over that period. We can use those measures and a few others to model overall liking in our genetic evaluation, and we can see that that's also declined as well. So geneticists and meat scientists have been talking to each other and trying to get some of this meat science into people's breeding programs so that we can make sure that we're breeding sheep that have potential to provide good eating quality. At the same time, MSA has been working away. So we have a pathways model currently for the Meat Standards Australia lamb program. And you can see it's worked quite well. Pre-MSA, there was a scenario, so I spoke about 20% of loins being tough. So there were a lot of loins here. You can see shear force above 5. And they're in red because it doesn't matter what happens after 5, whether it's juicy, flavorness, just consumers don't like it. It's flat out no good. So then there's this amber region, which depending on those other factors such as juiciness, flavour and overall liking, sometimes those lambs are okay. But you can see there the distribution of massive tail. So it was a bit of a lottery for the consumer pre-MSA when they went to buy lamb. So post-MSA, after the implementation of a few key features, which I'll go through, that volatility in product has gone. They've removed those really tough animals, and now we've got a much more acceptable thing. So hopefully we'll talk about some of those things that we can do to shift that graph that way a bit more and get better eating quality experiences. Also, we've got some data in the resource flock. So this is looking at sire variation and what consumers say about that. So I'll go into what the resource flock is, but essentially this plots the terminal progeny that have been killed and eaten by consumers. The blue one's the maternal progeny that have been killed and eaten, and merino. So what we can see, the tenderness of the top side and the loin is pretty consistent relationship there. But those sheep in the terminal breeding programs where we have focused on lean meat yield, they tend to be a little bit lower in the score department, whereas breeding objectives that are focused elsewhere on other traits haven't pushed it down that far. But generally we see, regardless of breed, if you've been selecting for growth muscle, lean meat yield, eating quality declines if it's unchecked. So some clever farmers come back and say, well, we've got more growth, we can just kill the lambs younger, and younger lambs are more tender. This relationship shows that in fact hot stand carcass weight and overall liking are not really correlated at all. So we can kill lambs younger at a lighter carcass weight, and they're not necessarily going to be providing a better consumer experience. So that's kind of an irrelevant argument there. So to cap up that section, what consumers are telling us, they care about eating quality and that they're willing to pay. Lamb is considered a premium product and it features in those special occasion meals. And lean meat yield and intramuscular fat are negatively correlated. So selection pressure in our breeding programs on lean meat yield over the years has led to a decrease in eating quality in some lamb. It has been buffered somewhat by the influence of the merino flock on the Australian lamb industry, but however, we're still focused on improving eating quality in terminals. So I'll pass over to Steve and Debbie, and they'll introduce what their role is at Waratah White Suffolks and how this applies to them.
Thanks, James. The Waratah White Suffolk stud we established in 1995, and as it says, you can see on the screen, we join about 160 ewes annually. We sell around about 100 rams, stud and flock rams a year, and we also market a few stud ewes, or approximately 30 a year, out to other studs. We've been involved with LAMBPLAN since we founded the stud in 1995. We have a background in performance from previous employment, so we were always going to be involved in a genetic evaluation program like LAMBPLAN. We've been members of the White Suffolk Association since we founded the stud, and we've been heavily involved in breed governance, and both Debbie and myself have served, and Debbie currently serves on the White Suffolk Association Federal Council. I'm a past president of the association, and I'm currently the chair of the Super Whites group, which is a group of 18 breeders from within the White Suffolk breed who have a common focus, if you like, on what their breeding objective is, and that at the moment focuses very much on eating quality. James, perhaps if you could flick to the next slide, please. So our breeding objective here at Waratah is, our main selection index now is LEQ, but if we go back to our foundation in 95, 96, at the time there were two indexes available. They were based on yielding information, and they were the 80-10-10 index, which was 80 weighting on weight, 10 on fat and 10 on muscle, and the 60-20-20 index with weightings on the same traits. There was a lot of push within the White Suffolk breed to use 80-10-10 because they were looking to push growth, but in consultation with a few acquaintances of ours, we actually focused more on 60-20-20, and I think that I asked James to put this photo on the right of the two lamb carcasses, which is from one of your videos on lamb judging. And I think by using 60-20-20, we've actually ended up with breeding a line of sires which would breed more carcass one, which is the one on the left, which, if we go through that video, is the one that scored as the highest carcass. If we'd followed 80-10-10, we would have ended up with a longer, slabbier carcass that doesn't score as well. So from those two indexes, we then moved through the Carcass Plus index, which was a widely used index. We focused more on individual traits than the index as a selection tool, actually. And then Lamb 2020 and LEQ have come along, and they are more closely aligned with our breeding objectives, so we've used them more strongly as a selection index. Our flock now averages in the top 5% across all flocks. If you take it to the 2019 percentile band report, and the majority of our clients do market lambs in that 22 to 26 weight range, kilo carcass weight range, which is the domestic market. And I think I'll just hand over to Debbie to explain the other side of our business.
Thanks, James. So in 2011, Steve and I started Richmond Hill Agribusiness as a sheep consultancy. Steve has a Master of Animal Science, Animal Breeding Management from Sydney Uni, and I did the Grad Cert in Ag Consultancy through UNE. The things that we focus on in this business is a number of things. First of all, Steve's also an accredited LAMBPLAN scanner, so he scans about 30,000 sheep a year for fat and muscle across Australia, well, South Australia, New South Wales and Victoria. And I do a lot of data entry for other studs, also across Australia, including Western Australia and Tassie, as well as New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia. And I specialise in data submission for people to get their data into sheep genetics and understand what they're putting in and what they're getting out. We also do mate cell for other studs. We've been using, first of all, it was called TGRM a while ago and developed into mate cell. And we've been using that in our flock for many years now. And we've also started running mate cell for other clients that would like to do it. And we do it for, well, mate cell is you can use it to do selection of animals as well as joining allocation each year to achieve maximum genetic gain while you minimise your inbreeding. We also run training courses. I run a Data Smart training course, which is on about ASBVs and how to do data entry into various software programs. And I also have recently developed an Excel training course to teach people Excel skills that they need now that there's electronic IDs and how to import data into their software rather than manually typing it in. So that's some of the things that RHAG does. Thanks, James.
So, James.
James, can we go to the next? Yeah, yes. Beautiful.
So we just brought this slide up because if you look at about 2014, up until then we didn't have any access really to eating quality traits. We had research breeding values for eating quality traits from about 2013 onwards. So we became cognizant of those traits, and but up until then we'd be selecting basically on growth, fat and muscle with things like worm egg count and birth weight thrown in. So you can see that there's a sort of rise in the eating quality traits. I should explain it. These two indexes, TCP and LEQ, both have eating quality built into the index. So there's been a slight rise and then a fall off in a fall off in 2014. But when we had eating quality traits available in the selection, either as individual traits or built into an index like LEQ that we use now, you can see that we've made quite a dramatic rise in those two indexes, both of which have eating quality in them. So it's an indicative of the fact that we're actually making gains in eating quality traits within the flock. And that's, I just wanted to point out that up until 2014 we didn't have eating quality traits in there, so we were sort of going up and down on these type of indexes that have those traits in them. But now that we've actually got those traits built into an index, we're able to make quite significant gains. Thanks, James.
No worries. Thanks, Steve and Debbie. So this second section, I'll take you through what are we doing at MLA. So we've got a few programs of work which are relevant to tackling this sheep meat eating quality topic. The first of those is the sheep genetics program, which I work in. The second is Meat Standards Australia, and the third part is a part of MSA, which is end user and consumer adoption, so getting lamb onto a plate. So let me go through that. So sheep genetics, our role is to deliver the genetic evaluation for sheep via ASBVs. We also, so you'll see that branded through LAMBPLAN and Merino Select. We've also got the Dooney and goat analyses as well. So we've got 950 flocks, which are distributed around the country. So my role in particular is to get the data in, the analysis from on-farm software, and that's what Debbie helps with as well. We report the breeding values on our website and directly back to people to use in catalogues and for ram buyers to inform their selection decisions. We're offering training and support to help people use tools like MateCell and genomics. And we're designing indexes which manage the direction and the future pathway for sheep breeders. So as you can see on the left, we've got the distribution of our sheep genetics clients nationally. We've also got some in New Zealand for merinos. And you can see that there's pretty much LAMBPLAN and Merino Select studs in every sheep producing state, and the representation is pretty equal to where the sheep are. One of the greatest programs of work from MLA Genetics is in fact the MLA Resource Flock. So this project is in its current phase, is running from 2019 to 23, but it's existed for much longer prior to that, and it originated in the Sheep South Sea. So what it does is it represents a diverse range of breeds and sires. Those lambs get recorded on farm and for carcass traits, and then they're genotyped, and breeders are using those genotypes to inform prediction for eating quality, because I guess the biggest hurdle for implementing eating quality into your breeding program is it's a hard to measure trait, and it's hard to measure because it's expensive, and you can't kill selection candidates, obviously. So the resource flock is integral to getting genomic prediction started and maintained for breeders. So if we have a look at the size of the resource flock, so we've got, this is maternal breeds with intramuscular fat measures used in the analysis. Port Leicesters currently have made it, so they're one of the major breeds that can genotype for eating quality, so they've got quite a few records. And you can see composite maternals, Cootworths and Corriedales, they're emerging as they develop more records and get better prediction. Similarly with terminals, we can see Poll Dorset and White Suffolk, two major breeds within Australia, have very big reference populations for IMF and shear force, so they can reliably genotype for those traits. And some of the other breeds that are emerging, Suffolk, Texel, the Dorpers, Hampshires and South Downs have got a bit to go, but are getting there. And merinos, I didn't make a graph because it's just one bar. It's about 4.7 4,700 of those with IMF measures. So merinos can also genotype for those eating quality traits. So I mentioned that we take a diverse range of sires for the MLA Resource Flock. So we open up nominations in September and ask studs to donate some semen so their rams can be represented in the two sites. So we've raised lambs at Katanning in WA and at Armidale in New South Wales. And so the representation goes something like this, which roughly represents the makeup of the Australian sheep flock. So breeds like White Suffolk, Poll Dorset, Merino and Border are in sort of a maintenance phase. We need to keep their reference population up to date. Some of these other breeds are emerging, so they get a little bit more allocation, but essentially it roughly resembles the national flock. There's 150 sires per year. And what happens is those sires are joined to some ewes, and they're a fantastic resource for other genetic trait development, so they can get measured on farm for novel or emerging traits, as well as all the important ones like fat, muscle and weight. Then we kill them and take the loins from the abattoir, and this is pictures of a bone out at UNE. So here's some MLA staff helping out. What we'll do is strip off the fat, muscle, bone and get some lean meat yield predictions, as well as building samples for IMF and shear force measures later on, and also building samples for consumer testing. So we'll make little samples that the public can come in and score our lamb on. So it's all valuable information coming in there for LAMBPLAN and sheep breeders. And then finally, the practical application that farmers see from the resource flock is they can take a tissue sample unit, this gadget, and get enhanced breeding values from that reference population. The second thing that we're doing to make sure that eating quality is maintained in the national flock is we've implemented it in the terminal selection indexes as a minimum standard. So this is our decision tree about which index you should use. So do you see more value in improving or maintaining eating quality? So those that want to maintain it will use the terminal carcass production index. whereas we've got a pair of indexes for improving eating quality. And the distinction there is worm egg count. So Steve and Debbie are interested in worm egg count, they're interested in improving eating quality, and they use the LEQ index. In terms of programs that are happening through Meat Standards Australia, we have got a pathways model which is quite effective in maintaining the potential that those lambs have to provide good consumer experience on farm all the way through the value chain. So it starts on farm with things like nutrition and stress management. It goes through things like lairage and transport to slaughter. The MSA model manages a lot of things at the processor level, such as hang method, the chiller management, so making sure that those lambs are not chilled too aggressively and expose them to cold shortening, as well as stimulation, which helps that as well. And also a little bit about, you know, at the wholesaler level, how that cut is aged and packed as well, and finally ends up to the consumer. So that's why when I showed that graph before, the tail that's disappeared in those very tough lambs is because of this pathways model. The way that we benchmark MSA and know that it works is we do consumer testing. So we've got 100,000 consumer taste tests on lambs. These are just normal everyday people off the street. They're not meat scientists, they're not trained tasters. We want real people's data. And what they do is they score tenderness, juiciness, flavour and overall liking, just as they do in beef. However, you'll notice that we use different weightings in beef to lamb. So overall liking, as an example, gets a little bit more weighting in lamb because there's just a bit more to it, such as odour and things like that that people think is important. So we use these scores to feed into our genetic evaluation. There's also MSA cook by cut method currently available. So what that says is for a given age category and a certain cut, what cook methods are appropriate to give a decent eating experience. So something that's notoriously a bit tougher, such as a top side, will meet consumer expectations in a stir fry scenario for lamb and hogget, but not for mutton, so mutton's absent there. Whereas a classic favourite like a short loin chop is great on the grill for all age classes of sheep. So that's how you would use the cook by cut method table to make sure that the potential of that meat is met as people eat it as a meal. And the final part is research being done in this space to improve eating quality. So the first is lamb turn-off and packaging effects. So there's some innovations that are helpful in supply chain for increasing shelf life of meat. Some of those we have a sneaking suspicion, or we know that it will impact eating quality. So we've got some research projects to check out what the effects of modified atmosphere packaging or so forth might be. The other big one I spoke about was the Resource Flock to underpin genomic evaluation. And there's also eating quality and merino breeding programs. So AWI has a resource flock, if you will, of their own, the MLP, and some of those progeny, we've taken advantage of that, and they're being killed and assessed for those eating quality traits as well. So always trying to make the most of every opportunity. The other great thing about the resource flock is there's some projects to analyse emerging technologies that will be useful in plant. So we always try to jump on and get more value out of it. Some of those emerging technologies, I won't talk about the detail of them, but broadly speaking, operate on a cut surface or in a probe manner. There's quite a few that are in the running to be useful, and they obviously have their preferred applications in different plants. So taking a diverse approach, and that's being tested through a program called ARMTech. In terms of end user adoption, so making sure that people know how to cook lamb and keep buying lamb. Part of MSA includes chefs who work in the food service industry. So they've trained 650 professionals and they've attended master classes to learn how to get the most out of lamb. Spotless Catering have implemented MSA as a minimum standard. That's pretty significant because if you have family in boarding school, you've gone to the footy, if you know someone who's a fly-in fly-out worker and eats mine food, if you've got a grandparent in aged care, Spotless Catering has reach across all of those. So it's a pretty big win to have them adopt MSA as a minimum standard for all their consumers. Got a couple of other companies we've been working with, P&O and Gate Gourmet, which are big servers of beef and lamb. They have a lot of consumers, as well as Donata, who supply Emirates and Qantas as well. So certainly a lot of work going in here to make sure that food service keeps using lamb. And although it is expensive per kilo, there are other advantages for red meat, such as it's easy to cook and it's labour efficient in the kitchen. So if you pay a little bit more cents per kilo for an article, but it, on a per plate or per meal basis ends out cheaper. So that we're trying to highlight those things and make sure that lamb keeps being used and they don't stop chicken or fish. So what are we doing? SG and MSA are working with breeders across the supply chain to ensure eating quality is maintained or improved for the consumer. There's a fair bit of research underpinning sensory testing and focus on linking meat technologies and genetics to consumer outcomes all the time. And MLA have been working extensively with large food service industry companies to get lamb on the menu everywhere and for everyone. So, Steve and Debbie, do you want to tell us about your involvement in those research programs like the Resource Flock?
Thanks, James. It's quite obvious that with eating quality, we're talking about two traits in particular, intramuscular fat and shear force, that we can't measure on a live animal. So it's become very evident that if you want to use genomic selection, as James said, the resource flock underpins that genomic selection. So to be closely associated with that resource flock is of great advantage to us as a breeding organisation. So we've made a deliberate decision to be involved. We've contributed 11 sires into the INF resource flock since the INF began in 2007. And through our involvement, partly in super whites, but partly deliberately too by selecting sires, we've actually used 31 sires that have been used in the resource flock over the years. So we are fairly well associated with that resource flock. There's an evidence of an example of one of our sires, 170614, who's in the last cohort I think of the resource flock. He's also been used in super whites, and he has progeny across 12 flocks in Australia, and he's ranked in the top 1% for LEQ. So again, super whites, a group that we're a member of, along with 17 others across Australia, has contributed about 50% of the White Suffolk sires that have been used in the resource flock. It's not a condition for super whites, but it's a recommendation that super whites members nominate their rams to the resource flock, and obviously we've had quite a few chosen. So that's given super whites a great association with the resource flock and with phenotypic information. But the super whites group also took it upon itself in 2017-18 to run a producer-initiated fast-track program trial based around ramping up genetic gain in eating quality and lean meat yield in Australian lamb. And our initial idea was to genotype a wide range of animals from within our flocks. Partway through the trial, we actually took a slight change in direction, and rather than just genotype, we actually slaughtered some animals to get phenotypic information on them for eating quality traits, because we realised that was of more significance and had more effect on the accuracy of sires than just genotyping a large number of animals. So the real benefits of being involved in the resource flock are being able to get more accurate genomic information on these hard to measure or in fact impossible to measure traits on the live animal, like eating quality, and therefore we make faster genetic gain. Thanks, James. Now, this is just an example of what's happened in the Super Whites flock across the last 10 years. So the green line is the White Suffolk breed as a whole, and the blue line is all terminal breeds, and the yellow line is the Super Whites group. And this is for intramuscular fat ASBVs across the years. And if you think back to what I was talking about previously, in 2013, we first got research breeding values for eating quality traits. So the line, the decrease in the Super Whites flock a group has just started to ease off. And from about 15 to 16 onwards, we started to use the lamb eating quality index as our primary selection tool. So you can see that we've actually made quite a big turnaround in intramuscular fat breeding values within the group. It is quite dramatic, and if we were to put up a graph of shear force, it would be almost a mirror image of that with our shear force going down. So by using these selection tools that have eating quality involved in them, and these indexes that are available now, we have been able to make some quite dramatic changes within our flocks. Thanks, James.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And this does just represent the average of the terminal analysis, and we'll say that there's a huge spread and variation when you look at all the flocks. So certainly a lot of people who are going for eating quality, a lot of people that are not just yet. So that leads into this final section. What can you do as producers to improve eating quality? The first point is understanding the two traits that influence eating quality and how. Linking genetics to the consumer, and then the third part is making it work and applying it on farm. So what is the role of genetics and eating quality? Well, Steve introduced this nicely. There's two key traits that we've got in our genetic evaluation, that's IMF and shear force. And they're explaining a fair bit of the variation in what the consumer perceives, and that is tenderness, juiciness, flavour and overall liking. So we can draw a pretty strong relationship straight through from IMF and shear force to willingness to pay for the lamb. If we look at the relationship of those two ASBVs to the things that consumers say are important, increasing IMF is across the board favourable for every attribute. However, a standout is it's very strongly associated with increasing the juiciness of a piece of lamb. That's because a little bit of fat is like butter on bread, and it makes you salivate and perceive it as juicy. Decreasing shear force is favourable for all attributes as well, but it's most favourable for increasing the tenderness of lamb. So the value chain approach to exceed consumer expectations, this is if we bring together all those research programs and apply a little bit of blue sky or future thinking. In the genetics program, people will have accessible genomic tests and they'll be using DNA to get that EQ information in there. And carcass feedback will be informing some of the decision making on farm. That'll allow commercial producers to breed sheep to specific market specs, so it becomes a more efficient operation. And they're getting information of objective measures to help inform those decisions. Processors will be applying technology that improves lean meat yield prior to bone out, which you heard in previous webinars from the ICMJ series. And it'll be coupled with objective measurement of eating quality so that we're winning on both fronts there. And to meet consumer expectation, there's opportunity for brands to emerge to differentiate product and suit needs more so, and therefore create greater value. And so a lot of work is going into setting up a framework that will allow better feedback and pipelines so that we can understand what the consumers want and breed those rams for them, because it's quite a time before when you make a decision to mate some sheep before they're realised in any significance in the commercial world. So we might be talking over 5 years. That's why this pipeline is so important for information. So if you're at home and you're interested in breeding for eating quality, what are the things that you can do? Well, the first and most important thing, whether you're into eating quality or not, is to define a breeding objective. And that means decide which traits and therefore which index you're going to use to inform your selection decisions. Create some sort of benchmark is the second step. So where do you sit currently? So we've identified over here that lean meat yield, IMF, shear force, and the EQ index are going to be important objectives for this terminal lamb breeder. What they can do to work out where they sit currently is take note of the IDs of the rams, write those down that they put out each year, look up them on the sheep genetics website, and you can get their breeding values. So therefore, if I put those rams out that year and they have this breeding value, the progeny are going to reflect that genetic trend. So you can use ram team tracking to indicate how your flock is going for certain traits and for the index as well. So then you can use that information to work out where do you want to go and how do I buy a ram that's going to be better than the team I've got at home. So you can use percentile highlights, last year stuff to go out and buy better sheep and meet your breeding objectives. And we've seen it working for you. So this is a reflection of exactly the graph that Steve showed. There are seed stock breeders out there who are teasing apart that correlation. They're trying to break down the relationship between lean meat yield and IMF so that they can get more meat and better quality meat at the same time, essentially. So this is a trend of lean meat yield going up. In 2014, they had an epiphany and they realized that eating quality was important. They also had the tools available finally. And so you can improve them both at the same time. Just because there is a relationship doesn't mean we have to follow that relationship in our breeding programs. And the final one is for commercial producers to meet the criteria and recommendations to supply MSA sheep and lambs. So you must be MSA registered producer. Fill out your vendor deck appropriately so that we know that, or the processors know that. There's recommendations here such as minimum 2 weeks off shear, and that's to maintain the glycogen stores in the sheep so they're not too stressed. Fat score over 2 so that they go through the chiller appropriately and don't cool off too quick. Some carcass specs so that they're heavy enough and got enough cover as well. Minimising time off feed so that ideally we're optimising the amount of glycogen that they have. Keeping access to water is a recommendation and holding them on property beforehand. So there's a few pathways here. If these things are met on farm, you're pretty much doing the best you can to guarantee that your sheep are going to be as good as possible. There's also a feeding aspect as well. So keeping sheep and lambs on a rising plane of nutrition leading up to slaughter is a really good way. The type of finishing system, which is quite interesting, whether it's grass or grain, has little effect on eating quality. We haven't detected any so far. So provided that they're gaining weight, it doesn't really matter what feed base it is. Pre-slaughter minimum growth rates are recommended. So you've got 100 grams for crossies and 150 for merinos because they are a little bit more stress prone. So we just have a greater buffer in the merinos there. And they should be finished appropriately. If producers want more information about nutrition and growth, the best resources that MLA has is Making More from Sheep, so they can access that information there from our website. So what's next if you're inspired by the eating quality story and you want to keep going and implementing some change to on farm? The first step should be the MLA Genetics Hub. So that's a suite of videos and resources that simplify the language around genetics and help you to understand how to select sires in tropical and temperate cattle, prime lambs and merinos. So really great resource. I encourage you to jump on there. There's productivity and profitability webinars by MLA, which will touch on eating quality and the importance of it. The Bred Well, Fed Well workshops include elements of EQ. There's also profitable grazing system training packages and producer demonstration sites that are relevant to this area. There's a bit going on and there's plenty of ways to make sure that you're on the front foot for improving eating quality in the future. So to sum up, genetics heavily impacts eating quality. So I'd just like to emphasise that your potential is set when you put the rams out with the ewes. That's as good as you can get. You know, genetics is going to have a role to play there. There's also those on-farm management aspects to meat as well. To use breeding values and indexes to make informed breeding decisions. ASBV is the only way to make genetic gain in eating quality. And keep up those nutrition and management guidelines to make sure you maintain the potential of those sheep. I'll cross to Steve and Debbie, and they can talk about in practice what they do in their re-breeding enterprise.
Thanks, James. So from a Waratah White Suffolks perspective, we use eating quality traits in our breeding objective. As said before, we use the LEQ index, and we also supply eating quality information to our clients via the ASBVs, and we do that on our website. There's an example of last year's catalogue, so you can see we've got the IMF, shear force, dressing percentage, lean meat yield, and indexes on there. And the pen cards we put up at our sale and also at shows and other sales and field days. And we now have clients that are actually selecting rams based on eating quality traits. So they have niche market and supply lamb directly to butchers in Melbourne. And so they're actually selecting their rams based on their eating quality traits. Thanks, James. We go to the next slide. So from an RH Ag perspective, we offer training courses in ASBVs, including, and I always include discussion on eating quality traits and genomics and what that means for people. As I said before, we offer mate cell for other studs for doing their selection and joining each year. And I always include, and if there is an example there of a report that I would give to a person that gives them a list of traits, and I would include LEQ in that, even if TCP is their major selection trait. I always put it in there anyway. And I also include the IMF, shear force, lean meat yield, and dressing percentage traits. As you can see, they're down the bottom. So what you're looking at is a predicted 2020 mating result. So the average of the whole drop, the minimum value in that drop, and the maximum value in that drop. And where I can, I put in the previous year's actuals. So what their previous year's drop, the values actually were for that drop. So you can see the 2020 is the predicted result of the mate cell joinings, and the 2019 is what happened the year before. So they can see what progress they're going to make before they do it. So yeah, in practice, we do use eating quality traits in both businesses. So the consultancy business and our on-farm sheep stud. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Steve and Debbie. Claire, I might pass back to you for any questions. And if anyone has an appetite for eating quality now, you can jump on the genetics.mla.com.au website, which is that one I pointed out before, or our sheep genetics website is a good resource as well if you're a little bit curious. If you've got particular questions, you can contact us on those details there. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks very much, James, and thanks, Steve and Debbie. I think this particular topic is a really good example of how breeders and researchers of both meat science and eating quality and members across the supply chain can come together to drive a consumer outcome. So thank you very much for your presentations and your time today. We've got a couple of questions. First, I'll send one to Steve and Debbie, send one your way. There's no real clear market signals for eating quality at the moment. So as a breeder, what motivates you to alter your breeding program to improve eating quality?
I think, Sarah, that the evidence is that it will come. I think, and as James said, anything we do in our breeding program now is not going to have any great impact on our commercial breeders for 4 or 5 years. And you know, if we wait 4 or 5 years before we actually decide to do something, or before the actual market signals are there that yes, we definitely need to do something about eating quality, then we're behind the 8 ball. So we've got to take a little bit of a leap of faith and go with what the research is telling us, and go with what some of the processors are telling us, even if they're saying it very quietly, that eating quality is going to become a major driver in their grids, and therefore we think our commercial clients should be involved with it as soon as possible.
Can I just add, there was evidence that eating quality was declining. So you can either sit back and wait till it gets to the point where nobody wants to buy lamb, or you can do something about it now. So that's what we decided to do.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. And I've got another question here for James. So James, is there any effort to boost the involvement of other breeds such as Aussie Whites or other clean skin breeds to broaden the genetic base looked at through the INF or the resource flock?
Yeah, so those breeds like the shedders, they are included in the resource flock. We do have some Aussie Whites that we used, particularly to that example. We have quite a few Dorpers as well. Have been included. So yeah.
Cool, thanks. Next question. This one comes from Pete McGilchrist. There's excellent evidence that if producers are given the right tools, they can arrest an unfavourable decline in a trait. Would you like to comment on the relationship between growth stage of maturity at slaughter on phenotypic IMF?
One for me?
Yep.
I think
yeah. So we did see an example of this is in the resource flock. We were struggling with the drought at Armidale, and some of the lambs were killed a bit later because of the drought, and they were finished on grain, and we did see some phenotypes for IMF that were very impressive. So phenotypically they did have very high measures of IMF because they were a bit older and they were grain finished as well. In the genetic evaluation though, it should be independent of age, and as long as the lambs are all within the same contemporary group or at the same time, we eliminate that effect. So genetically, we can compare what the actual DNA tells us, and not so much, and try and remove that noise about the phenotype.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, James. There's one other question here you may be able to answer, or we may have to take it on notice, but is there any correlation between breed or feed to the meat's aroma? Some people do not like lamb due to that reason.
Yeah, I certainly know the aroma that you're talking about. Sometimes it is a bit overwhelming. Don't know if there's anything significant with breed that I can recall, so I have to take that on notice. But I think with feed, there's certainly some looking into brassicas lucent, for example. So, but I can't quote those right now. Yeah, there would be.
And we've got one other question here for James again. Are there other countries doing eating quality research and making the moves to include these traits in their flocks? And could Australia differentiate its lamb on eating quality and improve the producer's returns?
Yeah, so we are relatively at an advantage here compared to the other sheep producing nations in terms of the phenotype. So our national average for IMF is a lot higher than the UK and New Zealand. I think that's as far as our data goes. But I'm not sure what efforts they are making to include them in their breeding programs, but Australia is definitely putting a very strong focus on it. We're somewhat lucky that we've got so many merinos in the country because they're buffering the decline in eating quality compared to other nations.
All right. Well, that's the end of our questions that have come through. Thank you very much, James and Steve and Debbie, for your time. It's been really great to have you involved today and spruik some good messages about eating quality to our ICMJ audience. So thank you very much for coming today, and I'll hand it over to Michael. He's got a couple of polling questions to run.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you to our speakers today. Before everyone departs, I'm hoping you might spend 2 minutes just to answer 4 short questions poll questions just to provide us some feedback on the presentations today and how useful the information was. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think nearly everyone who's been in the room has voted, so we'll close off that poll in about 10 seconds' time. If you haven't voted, now's your last chance. And then we'll say thank you and good day to you all. Thank you for joining us.